My presentation is up, so it's my turn at bat.
It is your turn. Could you introduce yourself, please, Dr. Yunkap?
Yes, my name is Yunkap Wankam, and you see, I think there are 3 affiliations there under my name, and I put them in order of relevance to this particular discussion. I'm the executive director of the International Society for Telemedicine eHealth, and I'm very proud to say Zoom is a member of our family of one of our corporate members. I also have my own consulting business, and I am chairman of a startup called Telenet Health International. Next slide, please. My role here today, I believe, is to look at the policy and strategy side of cybersecurity, and I'll focus rather heavily on WHO and what WHO does, because in LMICs, WHO has a lot of influence, and what happens at WHO, particularly at the World Health Assembly, is what drives the policy environment in many of these LMICs. So back in 2006 or 5 rather, when the first resolution of the World Health Assembly was done on eHealth, we were asked, I was at WHO at the time, we were asked what's important. We can't do everything. So we came up with 8 priority action areas. I segment them into these 2 application areas and enabling actions. And the 2 enabling actions that would particularly relevant to what we're discussing here would be the business intelligence about eHealth at the time. This diagram applies now as in the digital health area as it did with the eHealth epoch, so I can use them interchangeably. So business intelligence about digital health and public-private partnerships for ICT R&D for health. In other words, getting health not to depend on adapting things designed for other sectors of the economy to serve health, but actually designing for health, getting the technologies to do that. Next slide, please. So in this, security has always been a thread which ran through all of the major declarations about digital health in WHO, both at the Secretariat and in the World Health Assembly itself. So you see that the after the 2005 declaration, the executive board priorities included, knowledge and transfer of information of digital health, recognizing the essential and secure online management of health data, security threads through all of this. The latest resolution in 2018 again talks about data access, sharing, consent, security, privacy, interoperability, etc. So security has always been there in whatever WHO has done in this space. Next slide, please. And so in the, next slide. There we go. So in the WHO has recently come up with a digital health strategy 2020 to 2024, which lays emphasis on the scaling up of digital health, that to make sure it's ethical, it's safe, it's secure, reliable, equitable. Major keywords there, secure, and I will personally focus also on equitable and sustainable, and developed with the security principles of interoperability, et cetera, et cetera. So threads through all of that. Next slide, please. So since I'm not an expert in this, I decided to go to look at what's happened since all these declarations that WHO has made. And I came across a number of findings that people in the space have made in the recent past. And one of them has to do with to look at the cybersecurity challenges in LMICs. And they identify key causes as having to do with the prevalence of unlicensed software, using out-of-date systems, siloed systems within organizations, and lack of trained staff, both in the regulatory instrument, the Ministry of Health, and the development partners who financially drive a lot of what happens in health in many LMICs. All of these causes are exacerbated by the shortage of trained specialists within the development communities themselves, trained specialists in this area. So in my view, there's a lot of room, a lot of opportunities, guys, to working with the development partners who support health in LMICs. And examples of attacks in several countries, underscore this. Another useful resource that I found in looking around was a report prepared by the Leading Health Systems Network, which is their secretariat is at Imperial College in London. And you can't see the details of this. The interesting is that in their survey of a small number of countries, but these countries cover all WHO, 6 regions of WHO. So in some ways, could be seen as almost representative. But next slide, please. We'll come back to the details of this later. Next slide. So the one of the questions they asked about the respondents from these provider organizations in these countries was the budget, how much budget there was for cybersecurity. And the stunning thing is that 43% of the respondents did not know whether there was a budget or not for cybersecurity in their healthcare organizations. Another 43% said it was between 0 and 10% of the budget, and only 14% of the respondents had a budget above, or budget share above 10%. Next slide. So this is, again, from that study, the maturity of the various domains. They looked at, they proposed various domains for cybersecurity having to do variously with governance, awareness, etc. And you see that on a scale from 0 to 5, many of them, all of them are below 3.5, and there are even 2, that are below 2.5. That's awareness and education. So naturally, and by coincidence, other researchers believe that the solution areas lie in building awareness about cybersecurity and training staff on cyber hygiene. Next slide, please. So another study focused on the cyber poverty gap. That's, again, the gap between the high-income countries and then low and middle-income countries. And the Institute of Global Health Innovation Forum claims that there's evidence that healthcare systems are still lagging behind others in the adoption, in adapting to the increasing vulnerabilities. In other words, the awareness is and the action are lagging behind, the reality. It's very much analogous to the relationship we have between the advances in technology and the regulatory environment in LMICs to manage and get the most out of these technologies. And what are the causes of these cyber gaps? Limited understanding of the existing healthcare cybersecurity efforts on a global scale. And we'll come back to that later in the proposal that we offer at the end. And the variance in cybersecurity planning across between high-income countries on one hand and low and middle-income countries on the other. Next slide, please. So if anyone who's been to London would recognize this expression, mind the gap. And Ash, when you talked about the equity, and other speakers have mentioned, equity is one of the fundamental principles of health. And I particularly like this statement by one of the main proponents of the NHS in London at the time, who in a 1952 essay said, and I quote, "The essence of a satisfactory health service is that the rich and the poor are treated alike, that poverty is not a disability and wealth is not an advantage." Now, so when we talk about cybersecurity, part of that that gap or the part of the challenge of cybersecurity is created by the gap between the rich and the not so rich countries in terms of all the things having to do with, the cyber world. Next slide, please. Right. I'd be remiss not to talk about mobile phones. Ash, you mentioned the need, what's the term now? The opportunity to leapfrog and not to go through stages that other older economies or industrialized countries went through. Absolutely. And one of the major drivers of the adoption of digital technologies in the health sector and elsewhere in LMICs is the mobile phone. So from health apps to audio-based telecommunications and video consultations, now Zoom on app on the mobile phones are the key drivers. And so if we talk about security, cybersecurity in the health sector, we must spend some energy discussing cybersecurity for mobile devices. We must build safeguards on the dissemination of health information as well. We talk about, Chris talked about patient safety. Now, one of the key aspects of patient safety or hazards presented patient safety is causing bad information being circulated among people, which can cause harm to the public health. So this COVID, for example, has demonstrated, if you look at vaccination rates within African countries, they're dismal. They're absolutely dismal. On average, it might be up to 1% of the population covered by vaccination. And the challenge there is not so much the absence of vaccines, but reluctance of people to get vaccinated. Some of it fueled by campaigns, anti-vax campaigns perpetrated on social media. So I personally believe that it's important that regulators, the government, which the Ministry of Health, who's the regulator of health and stewards of health in all these countries, institute safeguards against dissemination of proven scientific falsehoods, which are harmful to the population. I know this is treading a very thin line between freedom of speech, where it exists, but the greater good, the public good, is important. And given the influence, how much people get information from handheld devices and through social networks, it's important that we think through how to safely ensure that people do not circulate harmful information through these very popular devices. Next slide, please. So the this report that I mentioned earlier from the Leading Health Systems Network, they proposed the following framework for addressing the issue of cybersecurity awareness in LMICs. I won't go through the details of it, but these slides will be available for you to look at. What I like about this is the fact that it's a framework. I personally like the idea of frameworks, which not so much help us look at things through the same lens, but enable us to assess and evaluate using the same criteria. In that way, we can do comparisons of apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And if we all adopt the same frameworks, I think we can more readily share information and compare results of what we do, more readily translate successes from one context to another. And this does not in any way mean that the frameworks need to be static. They can evolve, should evolve, but they should evolve from a common base. And I think that's the healthy thing. I myself have proposed certain frameworks for sustainability of digital health in countries, primarily LMICs, because the model, the framework works best in centralized health systems. And some of the elements of that framework deal with the ability to share information and knowledge. And so next slide, please. So I just want to spend a few minutes, therefore, on this, what I've modified it to call it the Cybersecurity Global Knowledge Commons. It generally, I speak about the Global Knowledge Commons for digital health, but in this context, it could just as well apply to cybersecurity if we thematically limit ourselves to cybersecurity, and and we would still have the same relevant questions to ask. What this model, this framework asks is the following: who is doing what, where, how well is it working, what can we learn from it, and what can we use from it? It's inspired by the fact that a lot of energy is expended in reinventing the wheel, in large measure because people do not know what is already out there. So Ash, when you ask us to work together, this is precisely what we're saying here, that there is a need for people to know what's already happened so they do not expend energy reinventing the wheel. But to do so, it has to be done in a structured fashion. And this, the right panel shows the cover of a report that we launched in Rio de Janeiro in 2015, which is the report was prepared under the auspices of the Innovation Working Group, which was set up by then Under Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, to help provide information and a hub for innovation to support health using innovations in technology. This particular report focused on the creation of this global knowledge commons. What are some of the rules that we could all follow if we wanted to create a plug and play network where you could provide the information that you use, manage from your organization, and allow authenticated users from outside to be able to access that. And if we could do this on a global scale, then we think we'd be able to solve many of the problems that we have. The example I usually cite is if you took just the small universe of the people on this call, if we put their collective knowledge together and that was accessible to each of us, just think of the power of what we could do just with the people who are on this call. Now, if you extend that to a broader network of people outside this circle, you can see the power of it, and would be able to then answer that question on the left panel. It'll be quite useful indeed. So my plea to this call to the people attending this session is that we should build this global knowledge commons. It doesn't have to have the whole world. Global can be nuanced. We don't need everybody in at the same time, but just getting all the nodes or a node from each of the people participating in this call is already a useful activity. And the International Society for Telemedicine and eHealth, which, as I said, I serve as executive director, is committed to of digital health and cybersecurity as one of its strands by building such a network to provide resources for those who need to share information on this subject. Next slide, please. I thank you for your for listening, and these are my contact details. You can reach me at any of those emails. So,
Yunkap, thank you so much for your very, very thoughtful comments and sharing your expertise. And I've noted in the comments to everybody that I think there's a really important opportunity for us all to work together in the coming year to move this whole field of telehealth, telemedicine, eHealth, mHealth, and look forward to doing that with you.